So, hello, sound class. This is my attempt of kind of showing you a little bit about the process, continuing trying to show you about the process that I'm working with podcast. Um, and I'm sorry it's super incomplete, and it's just kind of like it's almost like partly making up as we go along. So what I did was I wrote a kind of an outline. You can see it here, and I'll make an example. I'll put this in the container in a Cougar course container, and so what I was doing was emailing. First, I emailed my partner Ken Seth, and then I basically laid this out, and I said, hey, okay, part one is you and I, Ken Seth, we're starting the show. We're going to talk about the show, talk about sound forensics. The show is about mostly about sound forensics, and then we have, like I think most podcasts should have multiple things going on, with a main story and a couple sub stories. The main story is sound forensics with an interview with a person who does sound forensics, Brian. The other part is that Brian brings up, and when I talked to him like a few months ago, he talked about how houses and electrical grids give out sounds, and that reminded me of a sound artist, which we will cover briefly down here, Christine Kubich. So that's like a second or even third part of the story. The second part of the story is that we are now starting to bring in our own music. Since Ken Seth and I work on music together, or we do separately as well, we're bringing in music in each podcast that kind of fits the idea of this podcast. Brian is also an experimental musician. He's going to bring in 1 minute. So that's three different things packed into one podcast, and you see the back and forth. So what Brian did is I outlined his part two and part three is Brian, and I sent him an email. I said fill it out, and he sent me back a lot of stuff. And it's so technical. I'm working right now on breaking it up, and then I have to edit to make it kind of flow better, because he's very technical, he's very scientific, and IE is very nerdy, and I want to make sure that something nerdy and it translates well. So anyhow, that's that. I don't really have much to say. I'll come back to you when I start recording, and maybe give you some tips on recording your voice. I have a nice system set up. I will say, if you're going to record on your iPhone, make sure your iPhone stays the same distance each time, so it's not up, back and forth. I have an issue with doing that with my microphone. That's one of many different things you can to make your sound and voice more consistent. So I think the summary of what I'm trying to get to is, again, I'm still mapping out my actual podcast, and I'll give you an example of this hopefully soon. I'm still mapping out some of the dialogue, and I feel like because it's COVID and we all can't really meet together, I'm doing more of this dialogue than I normally would. Maybe we would be able to meet together and record it together a little bit, so I would do less structure. But I'm doing a lot more writing out loud, a lot more dialogue, and making sure before we hit the microphone. So I'm going to do one pass is what I'm doing right now with this document. And once I'm finished this pass, and I send it to Brian and Ken Seth, and they add stuff, and then we're going to be ready to record, because you can't lay it out so perfectly, then you'll lose some of the spontaneity. So anyhow, I hope that this helps you. Sorry it's not a complete, you know, a complete step-by-step podcast, but you get to see how one is kind of almost organically being created at the same time. So there you go. Hopefully that helps. And yeah, so some of these documents will be in the container, so you'll watch this tutorial and you'll look at what I'm writing out. All right.